Millionaire's twins were blind, until the new cleaner did this. Richard Thompson didn't know what to do anymore. His 7-year-old twins, Emily and Olivia, had lived in complete darkness for 3 years, ever since they lost their mother in a household accident. The best doctors in New York City assured him there was nothing wrong with their eyes, but they had simply stopped seeing after the trauma. That was when Martha Johnson rang the bell of the mansion in the Upper East Side on that rainy Monday in June. The 52-year-old woman firmly held her work permit, not imagining that her arrival would forever change the life of that family, shattered by grief. Richard watched through the security cameras as Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper who had taken care of the house for 20 years, received yet another candidate for the cleaner position. She was the 15th in 2 months. All the others had given up within a few days, unable to handle the girls' withdrawn behavior. Emily and Olivia remained seated on the living room sofa, eyes open but completely empty, as if looking at a world that didn't exist. They wore identical yellow t-shirts, a custom they had maintained ever since their mother, Jennifer, started dressing them that way to tell them apart better. Now, 3 years later, the clothes were one of the few tangible memories left of her. "Another one who won't last even 2 days," murmured Mrs. Wilson to herself, watching Martha through the half-open door. The new employee wore a simple purple uniform and had her brown hair tied in a practical ponytail. There was something different in her gaze, a serenity that Mrs. Wilson couldn't decipher. Martha didn't seem intimidated by the grandeur of the mansion or the heavy atmosphere that hung over that house. Upon entering the room where the twins were, Martha did something unexpected. Unlike the other cleaners who tried to force interaction or ask direct questions to the girls, she simply started cleaning while humming a soft melody quietly. Emily turned her head slightly at the sound, followed by Olivia. It was the first spontaneous movement they had made in months, something that didn't go unnoticed by Richard's watchful eyes, observing everything from his office on the 2nd floor. The businessman almost dropped his coffee cup when he saw his daughter's subtle reaction. For months, therapists had been trying to get some kind of response from the girls, without success, and there was a complete stranger achieving something in a matter of minutes. Martha continued her work in silence, respecting the children's space. She swept, organized, hummed quietly. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to touch them or force conversations. She was just present, creating an atmosphere of peace that hadn't been felt in that house for a long time. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. During the cleaning on the 2nd day, Martha went up to the attic to organize some objects that Mrs. Wilson had mentioned. It was a space that no one had touched since Jennifer's departure, full of dusty boxes and stored memories. Accidentally, she bumped into a box that was poorly supported on a high shelf. The contents spilled across the floor, old toys, photos, some personal items. Among them, a colorful water gun, blue and green, with orange details. Martha picked up the toy and smiled slightly. It was exactly like one she herself had as a child. Without thinking too much, she went down to the kitchen, filled the water gun, and returned to the room where the girls were. "Do you think it still works?" she asked, more to herself than to the twins. She pulled the trigger, and a jet of water arched through the air, producing a characteristic sound that echoed through the silent room. To everyone's surprise, Emily and Olivia smiled. Not just smiled, they laughed. A low laugh, almost inaudible, but genuine. The sound reached Richard's ears through the intercom he always kept on to monitor his daughters. He dropped everything he was doing and ran downstairs, arriving in the living room breathless. "What did you do?" he asked, seeing his daughters with more lively expressions than he had seen in years. "I found this in the attic," explained Martha, showing the water gun. "It seems they liked the noise." Richard looked at the toy and felt a tightness in his chest. It was Jennifer's. She used to play with the girls in the garden on weekends, having water fights that ended with everyone soaked and happy. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice slightly choked. "In the attic, sir. It was in a box with other things." At that moment, Mrs. Wilson appeared in the room with a clear expression of disapproval on her face. "Martha, "I told you not to mess with Mrs. Jennifer's things," she said in a stern tone. "Those things are stored away for a reason." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, it was an accident. The box fell and—" "It doesn't matter. Put it back where it was." Richard watched the exchange between the two women, then looked at his daughters, who had returned to their usual apathetic posture. The argument seemed to have broken the magical moment that had formed. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice carrying an authority he rarely used at home, "let her continue her work." The housekeeper looked at him surprised. Richard had never questioned her decisions about the organization of the house, especially when it came to Jennifer's memories. "Mr. Thompson, you don't understand. These things are bad for the girls. It's better they stay stored away." "And who decided that?" Richard asked, a spark of irritation appearing in his eyes. Mrs. Wilson was left speechless. The truth was that she herself had made that decision shortly after the accident, believing that hiding the memories of their mother would help the girls overcome the pain more quickly. Emily and Olivia, even without seeing, seemed to sense the tension in the air. Olivia began to rock her body back and forth, a repetitive movement she made when she became distressed. Emily remained still, but her little hands clenched into small fists. "They're getting agitated," observed Martha, crouching down to the girl's level. "Perhaps it's better to talk about this later." Richard nodded, realizing that his daughters were reacting negatively to the conflict. He asked Mrs. Wilson to return to her duties and stayed alone with Martha and the twins. "Have they always been like this?" Martha asked softly. "No," Richard replied, sitting in the armchair next to the sofa. "Before they were normal children, cheerful, chatty. Emily was more outgoing. Olivia was shyer, but both were full of life." "What exactly happened?" Richard hesitated. It had been 3 years since it happened, but it was still hard to talk about that day. It was a Saturday afternoon. Jennifer was preparing lunch while the girls played in the living room. There was a gas leak that no one had noticed. When Jennifer turned on the stove, "There was an accident in the kitchen," he said simply. "Jennifer, she didn't make it. The girls saw everything." Martha nodded with understanding. She asked no more questions, didn't try to offer empty words of comfort. She just stood there in respectful silence. "The doctors say it's psychological blindness," Richard continued. "The trauma was so great that their brains simply shut off their vision. Physically, there's nothing wrong with their eyes." "And the treatment?" "Therapies, medications, different approaches. Nothing has worked so far. They stay like this all day, quiet, lost in a world only they know." Martha looked at the girls, who continued to sit side by side, their little hands touching lightly. There was something in their posture that reminded him of a distant time in his own life. "May I try a few things?" she asked. "Nothing invasive, just simple things." Richard watched her for a moment. There was something in the way she spoke, a quiet confidence he hadn't seen in any of the specialists he'd hired. "What kind of things?" "Gentle sensory stimuli, sounds, textures, familiar smells. Sometimes when the mind blocks one thing, other senses can help open the path back." "Do you have experience with this?" Martha hesitated for a moment before answering. "Let's just say I've seen similar situations before." In the days that followed, Martha began implementing subtle changes in the girls' routine. She brought different objects into the room, each with a particular texture: a soft fabric, a smooth stone, a slightly rough sponge. She didn't force the girls to touch the objects, just left them nearby and allowed the girls to discover them naturally. Emily was the first to show curiosity, reaching a hesitant hand toward the soft fabric. Martha also began wearing light perfumes during her work, nothing too strong, just subtle fragrances that filled the space. She noticed the girls reacted differently to each scent. Some made them withdraw, others seemed to calm them. Richard watched everything with growing interest. For the first time in 3 years, he saw genuine signs of progress. The twins began responding to the stimuli, turning their heads toward sounds, reaching out to touch interesting textures. "How do you know how to do this?" he asked Martha one afternoon, after seeing Olivia smile while feeling the texture of a soft sponge. "Intuition, I suppose," she replied, avoiding going into details. "Every child is different. but they all respond to affection and patience. Mrs. Wilson, on the other hand, watched everything with growing discomfort. It wasn't that she didn't want to see the girls improve, but there was something about Martha's methods that deeply bothered her. "Mr. Thompson," she said one evening after Martha had left, "I don't think it's a good idea to let this woman meddle so much with the girls." "Why? They're responding better than they have to any treatment in the past 3 years. But what if it's temporary? What if she's creating false hope? The girls have already suffered too much. It's not fair to play with their feelings." Richard considered Mrs. Wilson's words. There was a logic there that he couldn't completely ignore. It truly would be cruel to allow the girls' hopes to be built up, only to be shattered again. "I'll speak with Dr. Richardson," he decided, "see what he thinks of her methods." Dr. Harold Richardson was the neurologist who had been seeing the girls since the accident, a serious man in his 60s, with decades of experience in childhood trauma. When Richard told him about Martha's methods, his reaction was skeptical. "Richard, I understand your hope, but you need to be realistic," the doctor said during an appointment. "Psychological blindness is a complex condition. There are no magic solutions or miracle methods. What this woman is doing could even be harmful." "But the girls are reacting, doctor, for the first time in 3 years. Temporary reactions are common. The brain can respond to new stimuli momentarily, but that doesn't mean real recovery. In fact, too much stimulation could make them withdraw even further." Richard left the office confused and worried. On one side, he saw the real progress of his daughters. On the other, he had the advice of an experienced professional warning him about the risks. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That evening, he decided to talk to Martha about the concerns that were arising. "Martha, I need to ask some questions about your methods," he said, finding her in the kitchen preparing a snack for the girls. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. What would you like to know?" "The girls' doctor is worried that your methods might be harmful. He thinks too much stimulation might cause them to withdraw even more." Martha stopped what she was doing and turned to him. There was a seriousness in her eyes that Richard hadn't seen before. "May I tell you a story, sir?" "Of course. When I was 8 years old, I lost my younger brother in an accident. He drowned in the river that ran near our house in the countryside. I was with him when it happened, but I couldn't save him." Richard listened silently, noticing the still present pain in Martha's voice. "After that, I stopped speaking, completely. The doctors said it was psychological trauma, that I needed time and medication. My family took me to various specialists, all with the same opinion. And what happened? My school teacher, Mrs. Aurora, did something different. Instead of trying to make me talk, she began teaching me other forms of communication, drawings, gestures, little silent games. Little by little, she showed me that there were ways to express what I felt without using words." "And did you start speaking again?" "Eventually, yes, but not because someone forced me or because I took medicine. It was because Mrs. Aurora taught me that I didn't need to be afraid to express my feelings, that it was possible to remember my brother with love, not just with pain." Richard absorbed the story, beginning to understand Martha's approach better. "What are you trying to say?" "That perhaps your girls don't need to be cured, Mr. Thompson. Maybe they just need to learn that it's safe to see the world again, that they can remember their mother with joy, not just with sadness." That night, Richard lay awake thinking about Martha's words. There was a simple wisdom there that all the complex treatments seemed to have missed. Perhaps the solution wasn't to try to erase the trauma, but to help the girls live with it in a healthy way. The next day, he watched more closely the interaction between Martha and his daughters. The woman had brought a music box that played a soft melody. While the music played, she showed the girls different objects related to the sounds: little bells, a gentle rattle, dried leaves that made noise when handled. Emily and Olivia were clearly engaged. They moved their heads following the sounds, reached out to touch the objects, even swayed slightly to the rhythm of the music. "It's remarkable," Richard murmured to himself. But his hope was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Richardson, who had come for an unexpected visit to personally evaluate Martha's methods. "Richard, "I need to see for myself what's happening here," said the doctor, entering the room where Martha was working with the girls. The doctor's presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. Martha seemed to become tense, and the girls, sensitive to emotional changes around them, began to withdraw. "Doctor, perhaps it would be better to observe from a distance," suggested Martha. "They're very sensitive to changes in their environment." "I've been their doctor for 3 years," replied Dr. Richardson in a slightly authoritative tone. "They're used to me." He approached the girls and began asking direct questions, trying to assess their level of response. But the more he insisted, the more they closed themselves off. Emily began swaying again, and Olivia hid her face in her hands. "They were fine until you arrived," Martha said, trying to keep a respectful tone but clearly frustrated. "These reactions you're provoking are artificial," Dr. Harold Richardson replied. "You're creating emotional dependency, not true recovery." The discussion between the two adults made the girls even more agitated. Emily began crying softly, and Olivia curled up on the couch as if she wanted to disappear. Richard observed the scene with growing anguish. He saw his daughters regressing before his eyes, returning to the state of isolation he knew so well. "Enough," he said finally, his voice cutting through the tension. "Everyone out now." Dr. Harold looked at him surprised, but obeyed. Martha hesitated for a moment, looking at the girls, then followed the doctor out of the room. Richard was left alone with Emily and Olivia, watching them cry silently. He sat on the floor beside the couch, and for the first time in a long while simply stayed there with them, without trying to force any kind of interaction. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Daddy shouldn't have let this happen." To his surprise, Emily extended a small hand toward him. He took it gently, feeling how much it was trembling. Olivia, noticing the contact, did the same. There, sitting on the living room floor, holding his daughter's hands as they calmed down, Richard had a revelation. Over the past 3 years, he had focused so much on finding a cure that he had forgotten to simply be present for them. After the girls calmed down, he went out to speak with Martha and Dr. Harold, who were waiting in the office. "Doctor," he said, his voice firm but controlled, "I appreciate your concern, but I need to try things Martha's way." "Richard, you're making a mistake," Dr. Harold insisted. "This woman isn't qualified to treat your daughters." "Perhaps not," Richard admitted. "But in 3 years of qualified treatments, my daughters haven't improved one bit. In 2 weeks with Martha, I've seen more progress than in all that time." Dr. Harold shook his head, clearly disagreeing, but realized Richard had made his decision. "If you're going to continue with this, at least allow me to monitor their progress. And at the first sign of worsening, you stop everything." Richard agreed to the condition, and the doctor withdrew, making his disapproval clear. When they were alone, Richard turned to Martha. "I'm sorry about that. He's just concerned." "I understand," Martha replied. "He's right to question. I really don't have formal qualifications for this." "But you have something all the specialists don't." "What?" "You understand what my daughters are going through because you've been through it too." Martha smiled sadly. "That doesn't make me a specialist, Mr. Richard. It just makes me someone who knows what it's like to be lost in the dark." In the following days, Martha continued her work with even more dedication. She brought new sensory elements, scents of flowers that Jennifer used to plant in the garden, textures of fabrics that reminded them of the girls' mother's favorite clothes, sounds of nature recorded on the tablet. She discovered, talking with Mrs. Wilson, that Jennifer had the habit of singing to the girls before bed. Simple songs, nursery rhymes, gentle melodies that helped them relax. "Mrs. Jennifer had a very beautiful voice," said Mrs. Wilson, with clear nostalgia in her voice. "The girls loved when she sang." "Would you know some of the songs she sang?" Mrs. Wilson hesitated. Talking about Jennifer was still painful for her too. The employer wasn't just a boss, she had become a dear friend over the years. "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" was one of the favorites, she admitted finally. And "Ring Around the Rosie." Simple things, but they loved them. That afternoon, Martha began humming "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" while organizing some toys near the girls. The reaction was immediate. Emily and Olivia turned their heads toward the sound, and Olivia even moved her lips as if trying to follow the melody. Richard, who was watching from upstairs, felt his eyes well up. These were precious memories that had been buried along with the pain, but which Martha was delicately resurrecting. Mrs. Wilson, who had appeared at the living room door, was also moved to see the girls' reaction. "They remember," she whispered. "After all this time, they still remember." It was at that moment that Martha had an idea. If the girls responded positively to memories of their mother, perhaps it was time to gradually and carefully reintroduce some of Jennifer's personal items. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, after the girls had gone to rest, "could you show me some of Mrs. Jennifer's things? Just simple objects, nothing that would cause too much emotional impact." Mrs. Wilson looked visibly uncomfortable with the request. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. These things are stored away for a reason." "Just small items," Martha insisted gently. "A perfume she used to wear, a piece of clothing that still has her scent, a book she liked. Things that bring good memories, not sadness." Mrs. Wilson struggled internally for a few moments before reluctantly agreeing. She went up to the master bedroom, which had remained untouched since the accident, and returned with a small box. "These are some of the things she loved most," she said, carefully opening the box. Inside was a half-empty perfume bottle, a silk scarf with delicate patterns, a well-used recipe book, and a simple silver bracelet. The perfume was her favorite, Mrs. Wilson explained. Morning Lily, from a national brand. She said it reminded her of her childhood in the countryside. And the book, her grandmother's recipes. Mrs. Jennifer loved cooking for the girls on weekends, always trying new recipes. Martha picked up the perfume bottle and smelled the soft floral scent. It was delicate, not too strong, perfect to use as a sensory stimulus. The next day, she sprayed just a small amount of the perfume on the scarf and placed it near the girls while they had their snack. The reaction was subtle but noticeable. Emily inhaled deeply and smiled slightly. Olivia turned her head as if searching for the source of the familiar scent. "Mommy," whispered Emily, so softly that Martha almost didn't hear it. It was the first word either of the girls had spoken in 3 years. Martha held back her emotion and continued normally, without making a fuss about the moment. She knew that drawing too much attention might make Emily withdraw again. Later, she told Richard what had happened. "She spoke?" he asked, barely able to contain his emotion. Just one word, very softly, but it was real. Richard sat down heavily in his chair, running his hands over his face. 3 years waiting to hear his daughter's voices again, and it had finally happened. "What do we do now?" "We continue slowly," Martha replied. "No pressure. No expectations that are too high. We just let them find their own way back." During the following weeks, Martha gradually introduced more elements related to Jennifer. The recipe book stayed on the kitchen table, open to pages of desserts the girls used to help prepare. The scented scarf was always nearby, creating a familiar and welcoming atmosphere. The girls began to respond more actively. Emily started speaking occasionally again, always in whispers, always words related to her mother. Olivia, although still not speaking, showed more interest in her surroundings, reaching out to touch objects and even walking short distances when guided. Richard Thompson significantly reduced his work hours to be more present. He watched fascinated by the gradual changes in his daughters, participating when Martha invited him, but always respecting their pace. One special afternoon, Martha decided it was time to take a bigger step. She took the water gun she had found in the attic and brought it to the backyard garden. "Girls," she said gently, "how about we go outside today?" Emily and Olivia hesitated. They hadn't left the house in months, preferring the safety of familiar indoor spaces. "I'll go with you," offered Richard, noticing his daughter's hesitation. "We can just sit on the porch first." Gradually, they managed to get the girls to the outdoor area. The afternoon sun was gentle, and a pleasant breeze rustled the leaves of the garden trees. Martha discreetly filled the water gun and, without warning, shot a soft stream into the air. The familiar sound echoed through the garden, and this time the girls' reaction was even stronger. Emily laughed loudly, and Olivia even clapped her hands. "Again!" requested Emily, her voice still weak but clearly audible. Martha obliged, creating a small spectacle of water jets that sparkled against the afternoon sun. The girls followed the sound with their heads, laughing and asking for more. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Olivia, trying to reach one of the water jets, stood up by herself from the bench where she was sitting and took a few hesitant steps toward the sound. "Olivia," Richard whispered, hardly able to believe what he was seeing. The girl seemed to be following the path of the water through the air, as if she could see. "Martha," he called softly, "shoot the water toward me." She obliged, and Olivia immediately turned to where Richard was, her eyes seeming to focus on something for the first time in 3 years. "Is she seeing?" Richard asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "Not completely," Martha replied, carefully observing Olivia's reactions. "But something is changing." Emily, encouraged by her sister's activity, also stood up and began moving toward the sound of the water. Her reactions were more subtle but definitely present. Richard began to cry openly, 3 years of anguish and hope finally finding an outlet. His daughters were coming back, slowly, gradually, but they were coming back. Mrs. Wilson, who was watching from the kitchen window, also had tears in her eyes. For the first time since the accident, there was real hope that the Thompson family could be happy again. But not everything would be simple. The following week, Dr. Harold Richardson returned for a scheduled evaluation and was shocked by the girls' progress. "This is impossible," he murmured, watching Emily respond visually to simple stimuli. "Psychological blindness doesn't disappear like this gradually." "But it's happening," Richard insisted. "They're getting better." "Or you're seeing things you want to see," the doctor replied skeptically. "I need to run some more rigorous tests." The tests were a disaster. The doctor's formal presence, the equipment, the clinical environment made the girls immediately regress. They returned to the state of apathy and disconnection that Richard knew so well. "As I suspected," Dr. Richardson concluded, "the reactions you were seeing were temporary and artificial. In a controlled environment, they show no real progress." Richard was devastated. He had allowed himself to hope, and now saw his hopes being crushed again. "Doctor," Martha intervened, "the girls improve in a familiar environment, with people they trust. Clinical tests are stressful for any child. Imagine for them who have already been through trauma." "Ma'am," Dr. Richardson replied with forced patience, "I've been working with this for decades. I know how to distinguish real progress from temporary emotional reactions." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The tension between the traditional medical approach and Martha's intuitive methods had created a difficult atmosphere in the house. Richard found himself torn between professional advice and what his own eyes had witnessed. Mrs. Wilson, in turn, began questioning whether she'd done the right thing by allowing Martha to meddle with Jennifer's memories. The guilt she'd carried since the accident intensified. "Mr. Thompson," she said one evening after everyone had retired, "I need to tell you something." Richard looked at her, noticing the anguish on her face. "What is it, Mrs. Wilson?" "On the day of the accident, I knew there was something wrong with the stove. There had been a gas smell since morning, but I thought it was just a small leak, nothing serious." Richard felt the blood run cold in his veins. "What are you trying to say?" "If I had said something, if I had insisted on calling a technician that day, Mrs. Jennifer would still be alive." The words hung in the air like a confession too heavy to carry alone. Mrs. Wilson had kept this guilt for 3 years, bearing the weight of a responsibility that perhaps wasn't entirely hers. "Mrs. Wilson," Richard said slowly, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm afraid that my attempts to protect the girls might actually be harming them. I hid things about their mother thinking it would be better, but maybe they need the memories to heal." Richard absorbed the confession in silence. Part of him wanted to be angry, to blame Mrs. Wilson for what had happened, but another part recognized the genuine pain she also carried. "What do you think we should do?" "Let Martha continue, even if the doctor thinks it's wrong, even if it's risky. The girls are responding to her in a way they've never responded to anyone else." The next morning, Richard made a difficult decision. He called Dr. Richardson and dismissed his services, deciding to bet completely on Martha's approach. "Richard, you're making a serious mistake," were the doctor's last words before hanging up. Perhaps he was, but for the first time in 3 years, Richard felt he was doing something his daughters truly needed. Martha, knowing the pressure she was under, decided to intensify her efforts. She brought more elements of Jennifer's life into the girls' daily routine, but always gradually and respectfully. While looking through the recipe book, she discovered that Jennifer had written small notes in the margins, comments about the dishes the girls liked most, ingredient substitutions she made to make recipes healthier. "Emily loves when I put raisins in carrot cake," one note said. "Olivia prefers it without cinnamon," said another. Martha decided to prepare some of the girls' favorite recipes, following Jennifer's notes exactly. The smell of baking carrot cake filled the house, and for the first time in a long while, Emily and Olivia walked to the kitchen on their own, guided by the familiar aroma. "Mommy," Emily said again, this time more clearly. "She used to make this cake on Saturdays," Olivia whispered, speaking for the first time in 3 years. Richard, who had rushed to the kitchen upon hearing his daughter's voices, had to lean against the door frame to keep from breaking down emotionally. "Yes," he managed to say. "Mommy made the best carrot cake in the world." The girls smiled, and for the first time since the accident it was a genuine smile, full of love and good remembrance, not just sadness. From that day on, their recovery accelerated remarkably. They began to speak more, always in whispers, always about their mother, but they were speaking. Their movements became more coordinated, as if they were relearning how to navigate the world. Martha introduced more sensory activities related to positive memories, planting flowers in the garden like Jennifer used to do, listening to music she enjoyed, even wearing some of her clothes that had been stored away. "You look like Mommy when you wear those colors," Richard commented one afternoon, watching the girls wearing 2 colorful scarves that belonged to Jennifer. "She was pretty," Emily said, delicately touching the fabric. "She smelled like flowers," Olivia added. They were small observations, but each one represented a giant step in the journey back to the world of the living. One afternoon, something happened that would change everything. Martha was playing with the girls in the garden, using the water gun to create little rainbows when the sprays met the sunlight at just the right angle. Emily was trying to catch the falling water droplets when she suddenly stopped and looked directly at Martha. "I can see you," she said, her voice full of surprise. Martha almost dropped the water gun. "What do you see, sweetie?" "Your brown hair, your purple blouse, your eyes are kind." Olivia, hearing her sister, began blinking repeatedly as if trying to adjust her focus. "Me too," she whispered. "I can see too." Richard, who had been working in the office, heard Martha's cries of joy and ran to the garden. He found his daughters looking around with genuine curiosity, seeing the world for the first time in 3 years. "Daddy," Emily ran toward him. "Daddy, you look different." Richard knelt and hugged both girls, crying openly. "Different how?" "Sadder," Olivia observed with the brutal honesty of children. "You got sadder after Mommy left." It was true. The weight of 3 years of worry and pain had marked Richard's face in ways he himself hadn't noticed. "But now I'm happy," he said, holding his daughters tightly. "Now Daddy is very happy." The girls' recovery of sight wasn't instant or complete. There were good days and bad days, moments when they saw clearly and others when their vision became blurry, but the progress was steady and real. Martha explained that this was normal in cases of psychological blindness. The brain needed to relearn how to process visual information, as if it were reconnecting circuits that had been shut down by the trauma. "It's as if they're remembering how to see," she explained to Richard. "The trauma made their brains forget, but now that they feel safe again, the memory is returning." Dr. Harold, when he learned of the recovery through colleagues, returned to the house to see for himself. This time his attitude was very different. "This is extraordinary," he admitted, watching the girls interact normally with their surroundings. "In all my career, I've never seen such a complete recovery from psychological blindness." "Martha's methods worked," Richard said, not hiding a hint of pride. Apparently so. I would like to document this case, if you'll allow it. It could help other families in similar situations. Richard looked at Martha, who nodded slightly. As long as the girls agree and aren't treated like lab rats. Of course, of course. Just observation and basic documentation. But the girls' recovery brought new challenges. They had lost 3 years of social and educational development. They would need specialized tutors to catch up academically, and therapies to help them process everything that had happened. Martha suggested that she herself could help with the educational part, at least initially. She had graduated in education years ago, before following a different career path. "You have a degree in education?" Richard asked, surprised. "Yes, from Columbia University. I worked in schools for a few years, then I changed fields." "Why?" Martha hesitated before answering. "After what happened to me as a child, I always wanted to help children who went through similar traumas. But the traditional educational system wasn't very open to unconventional methods, so I started working independently. As a cleaner. It's a way to be close to families who need help without raising suspicions or creating expectations. Often parents are so desperate that anyone presenting themselves as an expert creates enormous pressure. Richard was impressed with Martha's dedication. She had chosen a difficult and unrecognized path to follow her calling. "You saved my family," he said simply. "No," Martha gently corrected. "I just helped you find each other again." In the months that followed, the Thompson family's life completely transformed. Emily and Olivia became joyful and curious children again, though they still carried the emotional maturity the trauma had given them. They now spoke openly about their mother, sharing happy memories and expressing their longing in a healthy way. Jennifer's room was reopened, transformed into a space of positive memories where the girls could go when they missed her. Richard hired Martha as the girls' private tutor, a position she accepted with joy. Mrs. Wilson, freed from the weight of guilt through many difficult but necessary conversations, returned to being the caring maternal figure she had always been. The water gun that had started it all was kept in a special place in the living room, a symbol of the journey they had taken together. Occasionally, on special days, they still had water fights in the garden, always with much laughter and joy. One day, nearly a year after Martha's arrival, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang and Mrs. Wilson went to answer it. At the door stood a middle-aged woman with a girl about 6 years old. "Sorry to bother you," said the woman. "I heard through Dr. Harold that you had success with a case of psychological blindness. My daughter, she stopped seeing after witnessing a car accident. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with her." Richard, who had appeared at the door, looked at the girl. She had the same empty expression in her eyes that his daughters had had, the same withdrawn posture of someone lost in their own world of fear. "Come in," he said. "Let's talk." Martha, hearing the conversation, appeared in the living room. When she saw the girl, her eyes filled with understanding and determination. "What's her name?" she asked the mother. "Abby. Abby hasn't spoken since the accident besides not seeing." Martha knelt at the girl's level, not trying to force contact, just making herself available. "Hi, Abby," she said softly. "I'm Martha. Would you like to meet 2 very special girls? They went through something similar to you." Emily and Olivia, who had appeared curiously, approached the new girl with the special wisdom that only those who have gone through similar experiences possess. "Abby," Emily said gently, "you don't need to be afraid here. We understand what you're feeling." "It's hard when the world goes dark," Olivia added, "but we can teach you how to find the light again." Richard watched the scene with emotion. His daughters had become little therapists, using their own experience to help other children. That's how the Light Project was born, an initiative created by the Thompson family and Martha to help children with similar traumas. Part of the mansion was adapted as a therapeutic space where unconventional methods were used to help young patients reconnect with the world. Emily and Olivia became fundamental pieces of the project, sharing their experiences and demonstrating to other children that recovery was possible. They developed an impressive emotional maturity, but without losing the joy and spontaneity of childhood. Richard drastically reduced his workload, dedicating himself to managing the project and being the present father his daughters deserved. He discovered that true wealth wasn't in the businesses he had built, but in the relationships he had neglected. Mrs. Wilson found a new mission, caring for the children who arrived at the project, offering the maternal affection that many of them desperately needed. Her guilt was gradually replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Martha became the educational director of the project, developing methods that combined her training in pedagogy with the intuitive techniques she had used with Emily and Olivia. Her personal story of overcoming inspired both the families and the children they served. Dr. Harold Humbly asked to be part of the project as a medical consultant, recognizing that there was much to learn about non-traditional methods of treating childhood trauma. The first anniversary of Emily and Olivia's recovery was celebrated with a big party in the mansion's garden. Several families who had been helped by the project were present, children who had found their light again through the same gentle and respectful methods. During the party, Abby, the first child they had cared for, ran to Martha carrying the same water pistol that had started it all. "Aunt Martha," she shouted, her voice clear and joyful, "look, I can see where the water will fall." Martha smiled, remembering Emily making the same discovery a year earlier. The cycle of healing continued, creating waves of hope that spread far beyond that house. Richard, watching the party from the terrace, reflected on how his life had changed. 1 year ago he was a desperate man, watching his daughters wither in a world of darkness. Now he saw not only his own daughters flourishing, but dozens of other children finding their way back to the light. Emily and Olivia approached him, each carrying a drawing they had made during the party activities. "Daddy," Emily said, showing her drawing, "I drew our family." On the paper was a big house with a garden full of flowers. Richard and the girls were smiling next to a female figure with long hair. "Who is she?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. "It's Mommy," Olivia replied. "She's not here with us anymore, but she's still part of our family." "And look," Emily pointed to another figure in the drawing. "This is Aunt Martha. She helped us see Mommy with our hearts even when our eyes didn't work." Richard hugged his daughters, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The pain of losing Jennifer would never completely disappear, but he had learned to live with it in a healthy way, transforming sadness into love and purpose. Martha joined them on the terrace, watching the children play in the garden below. "Thank you," Richard said to her, "for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for allowing me to be part of this journey, for trusting me when everyone said I was wrong. How did you know it would work?" Martha thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't know, I just believed that every child deserves the chance to find their light again, even when the world seems impossible to see." The sun began to set over New York City, painting the sky orange and pink. In the garden of the mansion in the Upper East Side, dozens of children played freely, their laughter echoing through the afternoon air. Emily and Olivia ran to the water pistol, now a permanent symbol of the hope that had transformed their lives. Together they pointed to the sky and shot a stream of water that created a small rainbow against the golden evening light. "For Mommy," they said in unison, blowing kisses to the clouds where they imagined she was smiling back. Richard watched the scene with tears of gratitude in his eyes. His family had found a way to honor Jennifer's memory through love and helping others. The darkness had given way to light, and that light now illuminated the path for many other families lost in pain. The Light Project would continue growing, touching lives and proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most powerful. That love, patience, and understanding can work miracles that traditional medicine considers impossible. And at the center of it all, 2 twin girls who had found their way back to the world, carrying with them the wisdom of those who know both darkness and light, ready to help other children make the same journey back to hope. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story. Do you believe that love and patience can truly work miracles like they did for Emily and Olivia? Share your opinion in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the strength of family love.